Paper, where are you? Give me 1 second. I had my paper on here and it disappeared. It's not a good thing. One second more. Sorry.
No worries. Thank iPads.
No, it's weird. It was on there and it just totally disappeared. So I'm just going to save it again.
Do you have the Wi-Fi for that?
Yep. Okay. All right, I can get started. Are we ready?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So, welcome back from lunch. I hope you had a good one.
Yes.
So, for those of you who are new friends, I am an old-time Gapesarian. I have been involved with this society for about 20 years now, just about 20 years. I was a conference host in Sacramento in 2006. I was president for the organization for a few years. And most of my papers, I like what Mike Purdy did, and I'm going to do something similar to sort of contextualize this paper today. Most of my papers have been either explications of Gapeser or trying to work out problems that I thought exist in Gapeser, or trying to, a couple years ago I translated 2 of his unknown essays that I found in the Gapeser archive at the History of Science Library at the University of Oklahoma. But what I'm going to do today is something new, which is I'm going to introduce to you a theory that I have been working on for the last couple of years. And it's a Gapeser-inspired theory, but it's not a Gapeser theory. And so I want to introduce the theory, and I want to then try to tie it into Gapeser. Fair enough?
Yes.
We'll see how far I get. So the theory is called the blindness of the cure. That's the name of the theory, the blindness of the cure. And so this paper is called The Blindness of the Cure, the Deficient Mental Rational Misguidance of Everyday Life. And again, the blindness of the cure is an original theory that I've created. So I want to start by reading a poem that I didn't write. Is there any hope in this day when Kali is having a field day? Merrily sparking evil in everyone, pitching one's bro against one. Time was when I was a kid, said to my bro a bad word. He would react by slapping. I would go to Granny, complaining. Granny would sit in judgment, ask my bro to exercise restraint, giving a word back for a word, and not a slap for a bad word. Action and reaction are equal, says the natural law of physical, and no reaction to action is the spiritual injunction. When slapped on cheek, one Mahatma offered the other one. If that was followed every time, there would be no riots any time. But alas, isn't it a fond hope in this Kali Yuga of no hope? That was written by Kishore Kulkarni. It's called Oh Kali Yuga, Is There Any Hope? The 12th book of the Bhagavata Purana details the bleak conditions of Kali Yuga, the last of the 4 great cyclic ages, called in English the age of quarrel, or the age of confusion. Confusion, thank you. In this age, human lives are shortened, religion is profane, leaders are immoral, iPads don't cooperate. People are greedy. People turn on family and friends, and everyone becomes enemies. And all of that, by the way, is listed verse after verse after verse in the 12th book of the Bhagavad Gita. According to this worldview, we are about 5,000 years into its duration, which some say will last 432,000 years in total. Although Paramahansa Yogananda says it's already over, it ended with the age of Aquarius. I, looking around today, beg to differ. As we go deeper into this age, the conditions will worsen. Politicians will get more dishonest. Honor will continue to erode. Religion will continue to lose its virtue, and people will quarrel more. Perhaps people have always been this quarrelsome. In empirical terms, Pinker argues that we live in the most peaceful time in human history. Pinker identifies 5 historical forces that have resulted in the pacification of our species. The modern nation state, he borrows Hobbes' term Leviathan for that. Commerce, feminization, which he describes as the rise of interests and values of women. Cosmopolitanism, which he describes as the rise of literacy and everything that comes with it. And what he calls the escalator of reason. Certainly the last 3 of these, feminization, cosmopolitanism, and the escalator of reason, fit well with Gebser's idea of the conditions of and those that lead to integrality. Unsurprisingly, in this age of quarrel, others disagree. Falk and Hildebolt counter that Pinker's computations ignored relative population sizes that, if included, would have changed the numbers for the worse. Similarly, Archaea contends that Pinker only talked about military deaths, and he excluded all civilian deaths and collateral damage and all of these other things, so that he really underestimated where we are. Still, Pinker notwithstanding, it feels to many of us that we live in, as the Chinese curse says, an interesting time. It does seem to be an increasingly tumultuous time. Wars continue in Central Asia and the Middle East. I remind myself as a professor that my incoming freshmen have never known a time when the United States is not at war in Afghanistan.
Wow. Oh my God.
That war started in the end of 2001, the beginning of 2002.
Yeah.
Or as I like to call it, the lifespan of today's freshmen.
Wow.
Right.
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
So wars continue in Central Asia and the Middle East. Political violence and extremism abound the world over, including in not so surprising places like the United States. After all, we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the death of a protester in Charlottesville.
Mm-hmm.
And in unlikely places like Scandinavia. Religious violence is being perpetrated across Africa and Southeast Asia. We don't hear too much about it, but Boko Haram is definitely on the rise. And the tribesmen and herdsmen in northern Nigeria are taking a lot of life. There is violence across Southeast Asia. I never in my life thought I would be reading about mobs of bloodthirsty Buddhists.
Yeah.
The world is nuts. And symbolic violence is constant in social media. Symbolic violence. As many people say, read the article, but don't read the comments.
Yeah.
Our social media world is as much a battleground, albeit symbolic, as many physical places are. Ramsden demonstrated just last year that watching violent videos online affected 20% of her research participants' PTSD symptoms. That people are now getting PTSD triggers from online content. The anonymity and asynchronicity of the internet cause what Suler calls a disinhibition effect that empowers people to behave in ways that they would normally avoid in face-to-face situations. In other words, I can say whatever I want to say because you're just words on the screen to me. Maybe there's a little picture, but on places like Facebook, at the time people don't use their picture, and on Twitter, people don't use their real name. So after all, I can say whatever I want, no matter how disparaging, no matter how misogynistic, no matter how racist, no matter how whatever. And if it's Facebook, I'll probably get away with it. On Twitter, maybe not. Yet, we see many arguments occurring face-to-face as well. Researchers note what they call a Trump effect now in interpersonal behaviors. And this Trump effect has expanded to include religious and racial bullying by adults, as well as misogyny, sexual assault, and other socially unacceptable behaviors, or formerly socially unacceptable behaviors. Regardless of this Trump effect, many of our social arguments have existed for quite some time and precede the current administration. After all, we can't blame Trump for misogyny. He didn't invent it. He didn't invent racism. He didn't, he's maybe found a way to perfect it, but he didn't create it. While there are myriad examples of these social arguments, this paper will examine 4 current and common argument topics in the United States: vaccines, civil rights, feminism, and the Affordable Care Act, also known as either the ACA or colloquially Obamacare. So this next section is atemporality in argument. Each of these 4 cases, in case you didn't remember, vaccines, civil rights, feminism, and the ACA, are divisive arguments that have deep political and social significance. Another key commonality of the 4 is that each one of those, again, vaccines, civil rights, feminism, and the ACA, each one of the 4 is a solution to a problem. That's key for this conversation. Each one of those 4 things is a solution to a problem. Vaccines have been created and deployed to prevent or lessen the extent of illness and diseases, some of which were, when they were not fatal, which they often were, caused lifelong complications, including blindness, sterility, scarring, and other problems. Civil rights programs were established to address legal and social discrimination, inequality, economic disparity, and violence directed against people on the basis of race, religion, sexual orientation, and ability, among other things. Feminism is a response to a patriarchy that dehumanizes and disempowers women. The ACA is comprehensive legislation that addresses serious problems in the U.S. healthcare system. As stated above, each of these 4 examples is a solution to a problem that preceded it. Disease, discrimination, inequality, and a broken healthcare system existed before any of these 4 cases. Each of the 4 came about precisely because of the preceding problems. Each case is complicated with many moving parts, and each has its own imperfections. In each case, people have made incremental changes to tweak and improve them. Whether it's reformulating vaccine contents or their manufacturing process, passing new civil rights legislation to cover topics or populations previously overlooked, successive waves of feminism to address concerns of women left behind, or fixes to healthcare policy, each of the 4 cases have been modified since their relative debuts. Despite the fact that each of the 4 cases has been dynamic, the popular discourse in political speeches, current affairs TV and radio programs, and especially on social media, has framed each of these 4 cases in peculiar ways. Of course, there is serious political baggage with each, and each has been used by both liberal and conservative forces in the United States to serve their agendas. As much as it disappoints and harms us to do so, we must acknowledge the political dimension to each of the 4 cases. And just to sort of ground us, here are some. This is 1947. This is when the smallpox vaccine was made available. People literally lined up around the block to get their shots. These are sort of a then and now of civil rights. Whether we're talking about Martin Luther King and the Black Civil Rights struggle, or we're talking about the marriage equality struggle that has happened across this country, or we're talking about contemporarily Black Lives Matter. All of these are part and parcel of this larger civil rights movement. If we're talking about feminism, we can talk about the early suffragettes and the suffragette movement. We can talk about Angela Davis, who I chose here to represent women of color, who said, you know, the original first wave feminism left us out. There's no voice for us here. So feminism developed and changed and added additional voices. And today we get, you know, today's new generation, the Generation Z. By the way, do we call them Generation Z because we recognize this is it, it's the end of things? So, I'm not really sure. But you know, she's feminist as fuck, right? That's just how it goes now.
Just to put a pin in that too, the Equal Rights Amendment never passed.
Right, it never
Yeah.
passed, absolutely. I'm gonna talk about why. The ACA, you know, we're having this conversation right now about, is healthcare a commodity? Is it a human right? How do we portion it out? How do we make it happen? It's especially an issue because as the baby boomers age, 100,000 baby boomers hit age 65 every month, and that will continue for the next 15 years. So we have an issue. We have a problem. We have to figure it out. All right. So what's particular to these four cases? As much as it disappoints and harms us to do so, we must acknowledge the political dimension to each of these four cases. What is peculiar to these four cases is that their opposition tends to take an ahistorical view that frames these things as disruptive to a previously harmonious culture. Vaccines are portrayed by the anti-vax crowd as various things, ranging from a means of government population control to expressions of corporate greed and disregard for public health. Seldom in the argument does one find a discussion of the horror of the diseases those vaccines prevent or minimize. Those rare conversations tend to downplay the impact of those diseases and sometimes make the counter argument that it's actually healthy for a child to contract these diseases so that they build a stronger immune system. Likewise, the anti-civil rights discourse often describes the movement as a disturbance or dislocation that destroyed U.S. American social harmony. In this discourse, civil rights figures from Rosa Parks to Malcolm X to Martin Luther King Jr. to more contemporary figures like Colin Kaepernick and the Black Lives Matter movement are described as rabble-rousers and troublemakers who, but not for their troublemaking, we would be living in a peaceful and fair society. Feminists get the same treatment. They upset the quote-unquote natural order of things with their demands from everything from the right to vote, to open bank accounts, to access off-limit fields of study, to equal pay, to reproductive freedom, to the present-day Me Too movement and the very brave Dr. Ford, when they stand up and demand control of their bodies and respectful and non-threatening treatment from men. The discourse opposing the ACA often describes it as having broken our functional healthcare system. In each case, the opposition discourse frames these four cases as destroying a harmony. That perspective, no matter how widespread, we must remember, is false. Each of these four cases was a solution to a problem. Vaccines are developed to combat serious diseases, many of which kill people or left survivors scarred or with other permanent conditions like visual impairment or sterility. Today's 40-year-olds, you don't have to raise your hand, but new kids who had chickenpox and women who had types of cervical cancer that are preventable now with a shot. Today's 70-year-olds, new kids who had measles, mumps, and rubella. Today's 90-year-olds, new kids who had polio and scarlet fever. Today's 60-year-olds bear the scars from their smallpox vaccinations. Younger people don't have these scars because the disease was eradicated in the United States in 1949. The civil rights movement emerged as an effort to secure equality in a society that had restricted neighborhoods, redlining, unfairness in banking and business, segregation, police brutality, and entrenched white supremacism. For context, this is the front page of, oh, what happened here? This is the front page of nothing. Here we go.
Next one.
This is the front page of the Washington Post, Sunday, August 9th, 1925. You can't see it very well, but these are Klansmen. 30,000 of them walking down Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. And how did the Washington Post cover this? The headline right here, White Robed Klan cheered on in march in nation's capital. Police estimate 30,000 to 35,000 take part in the demonstration. Prayer fails to halt pain as parade ends.
That's a. What date is that?
That's August 9th, 1925. By 1965, by 1965, by 1965, other stuff happened. Okay, by 1965, the movement, the civil rights movement, yielded the Great Society legislation that changed housing and voting rights, edging us closer to extending to all Americans the rights guaranteed by the Constitution, but so long denied. Feminists demanded the end of the denial of basic rights that kept them from voting, from studying in most fields, working in jobs of their choice, having financial independence, having control over reproduction. Women who marched were maligned from coast to coast, and violence, including sexual violence, was used routinely against them. In the healthcare world, the ACA, an anathema today to Republicans, was ironically the Heritage Foundation's counter-proposal to Hillary Clinton's plan for a single-payer system. Both the Clintons and the Heritage Foundation plans were developed because there was general agreement across the aisle in this country that our healthcare system has deep flaws and that it needed major overhaul. The ACA, developed by the right, was put forward by the Obama administration as a centrist plan that could be agreed on by everyone. So here's the blindness of the cure. That these ahistorical arguments ignore the historical contexts of these four cases and the simple fact that each was a solution to a problem would be disturbing enough. But these arguments do something else. Without that historical context, they represent these cases, not as solutions to problems, but as the problems themselves. That is, the discourse is that each of these four cases is the problem. I call this phenomenon the blindness of the cure. Those of us with personal or collective memory of the devastation caused by disease, inequality, patriarchy, the denial of accessible and affordable healthcare know that however imperfect, each of these cases represented an attempt to solve a problem. When the opposition reframes and represents them as the problems themselves, four things happen. First, the narrative excises any memory or knowledge of a prior problem. Second, the past is represented or represented as harmonious, essentially good, and the most important thing, natural. Third, all attempts to change the status quo are framed as destructive to this harmony. And fourth, and this is the worst part of all, anyone involved in these attempts is branded as antisocial, rabble-rousing, mentally ill, or just plain evil. The irony of the blindness of the cure is that it can happen only when the movement so vigorously and often viciously opposed achieves some success. That is, we have opportunity to decry vaccines and the rest because things have improved, because they work. Because they work, we no longer tend to children with polio, at least in this country. It's come back in Afghanistan. In this country, we don't tend to kids with polio. Nobody now in this country loses a kid brother or sister to scarlet fever. And in this new context, we have the mental space to question whether vaccines are good. The cure blinds us to its need because we no longer see its needs. We are living its effects. In the case of civil rights and feminism, while we have not yet achieved the equality and respect aspired to by these movements, and it seems we have regressed lately, it is undeniable that things are better than they were 100 or even 50 years ago. We have to remember that. They are better than they were 50 years ago. They are better than they were 100 years ago, even if we aren't where we wish we were. While we have not yet achieved the dream, our current conditions are good enough to cause many people to forget the conditions that created the movements. Okay, so as I run out of time at the Gabeser conference, let me try to tie this into Gabeser. And I hope after the presentations that we've watched so far, Hans, I'm looking at you, I'm hoping that you can see where Gabeser comes into all of this, right? We can see, first of all, that this ahistoricity relies on deficient modes of mental rational, deficient myth and magic, right? When we ignore history, when we rewrite history deliberately, not an honest mistake, but a deliberate rewriting of history to serve a political ideology, that's deficient mental rational. And when that rewriting of history takes a particular partisan perspective and presents this as good and natural and harmonious, that's deficient magic. And anyone, therefore, who disrupts that by saying, wait a minute, I couldn't buy a house no matter how much money I had because of the banking rules or because of the redlining. And you're branded a traitor or a rabble-rouser or, you know, what did I say in here?
Part of the mob.
Part of the mob, that's the new one, right? The angry mob. For a while, it was witchcraft practicing lesbians, right? That was the slur for a while. I'm not making that up. They really said that. Some of us remember that. You were one of them. There we go. We have one in the back. Get her out of here. It's unnatural. The misremembering, the denial, the rewriting of history that reflect deficient mental rational and deficient magical and deficient mythic consciousness. The assertion that real history was harmonious and good, and that the troublemakers, the interlopers, the lesbian Wiccans, the rabble-rousers, and everyone else who have chosen to disrupt and destroy this harmony is unnatural and a danger to the mythic America, mythic both in the conventional use of the word and Gabeser's use of the word. Right? And so what we have with the blindness of the cure, and it's a good template because we can see it in play in a lot of places. We see an opposition to something reframing this solution as the problem. And it's a very, very dangerous and very common tactic. And the examples I used are perpetrated by the right, but there are plenty of examples that are perpetrated by the left. Do the same thing. The state of Israel is a great example that I didn't write into the paper, conceived as a solution to a long-standing problem. Now it is framed as though it is the problem, and if we just got rid of it, if it just disappeared, there would be no problems. Absolutely, absolutely. And so I think that, I hope that this theory makes sense to you. I hope that it's useful to you. It's something I've been working at for a long time, and the next stage, of course, is testing it, which is harder to do. I'm working with a public opinion specialist, and we're cooking up some ways of measuring it using public opinion testing.
Well, one thing that fits right in with this is how the current administration is getting rid of all the people who have institutional memory.
Absolutely, because you erase,
Yeah.
you excise that memory.
Yeah.
You erase that memory. But again, I don't want to paint this as this is what Republicans do, because I've seen this tactic used by right and left all over the world. I don't think one side owns this. I think this is a common thing.
Dave, were you aware of the anti-reflexivity theory?
Please tell me.
Well, there are elements to that are I see here, and it's essentially reflexivity was a response to postmodernism that you reflect on what the positive aspects of the modern world and you try to improve those. And the anti-reflexivity movement came about to essentially manipulate those messages
Mhm.
in a way to stop things like the Heritage Institute is heavily interested in the Koch brothers use anti-reflexivity to not directly challenge science like the science of vaccination, but they essentially go around and make you doubt whether these things are actually they actually work or not. They spread conspiracy theories to essentially arrest certain areas that they feel are a threat, essentially to capitalism,
Sure.
the free market, quote unquote, free market system. And so it's an approach that they've adopted using some of these methods to.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Can I make a request?
Sure.
While you're studying this, can you also study how to combat each of them?
I think it's important. I think it's important. And, you know, it's an irony, isn't it? When you get to a certain point in your career where you move back from teaching your students other people's theories and you start to create your own, then it's your twilight. And so it has to be, you know, it has to be taken on, the role of testing those has to be taken on by other people, which is one of the reasons that I'm bringing it to you here, because I think that this theory has some substance to it and can be used in a variety of ways and applied in a variety of methodologies. But yeah, I absolutely hear your point. Well, thank you very much. I figured you might like that. And it might work for you.
The approach of